media outlets that understand how important it is to get access and actually to tell what's happening on the ground. And when they didn't do that, I was
saddened, to say the least. I know. Those are things that does break one's heart, especially when you are in that profession and you could have given a more humanly
there were so many ways to do that story. I mean, there was no reason, no reason to fabricate a story. There was no reason. You have the access, you've got the access, you've got everything you need, and yet, but why?
Well,
it's just that.
That's another interview.
It's just
Afrofuturism in Ethiopia, taking inspiration from creators in the continent. Now, when we say Afrofuturism in Ethiopia, first of all, we need to explain that. Does Ethiopia actually understand Afrofuturism?
I believe in general terms, in order for Afrofuturism to flourish, we should understand our past and present first. Because basically, Afrofuturism is a cultural movement that ensures that Africans technologically or in different art forms represent their own culture. That's without forgetting the past, living the present, and ensuring that they are in the future.
Right.
It's initially, Afrofuturism, the term is coined by a social critic called Mark Derry in the 1990s in his essay called Black to the Future. So in it, he argues that a community, a black community that hasn't been given the space to exist in different art forms, that it drained its energy by, just trying to exist in any art form, can it be represented in the future forms? And that's where Afrofuturism comes in. But in order for that to understand, especially as Ethiopians, we need to understand our past, our history, and represent it in different art forms. But also, most importantly, for this generation, for us in our present, not to forget who we are and not to live in the content that we produce. Let me expand on that. A few examples. Let's take Teddy Afro. He was someone, before he broke the international market and became the Billboard #1, he was someone who was listened to, who was admired within Ethiopia. Right. We have over 120 million audience. And imagine if you manage to win that audience. That's why he reached that level. Akon, in all the songs that are produced in Ethiopia, especially from the northern part, because they take samples, I'm not bashing on Afrobeats here, but in all those songs that are sampling Afrobeats and all of that, which song did he feature in? Dishtagina. Because it was pure Ethiopian, it was purely from that area. So many international art forms sample Ethiopian music. The songs from the jazz compositions from Munat. Beyonce sampled Wede Harar Guzo, the classic, the instrumental version of Hailu Mergia. All of that. It's because they kept their roots. They didn't change who they were, but what they did was they expanded on it. They reinforced it.
Yes, they did.
They didn't reinvent it, but they invented it. They put their innovations into it, and they did their work. Whenever every international tourist comes to Ethiopia, where do they go first, especially in Addis? They go to Fandika.
I was just about to say, I was going to mention his name. Yes.
Because Malaku has dedicated his life to preserve the beautiful culture of the Azmaris, the beautiful culture. Every Friday, there are performances of different Ethiopian cultures with their dressing, with the music, with the instrument. They go there. They are loyal. And the Ethiopians who go to Fandika are loyal listeners, loyal followers of their work.
Even when Malaku goes abroad.
Malaku was first recognized internationally. But, you know, he never changed.
But he couldn't, because that was what he was selling.
But
that was what he's teaching.
But that is also who he is.
Absolutely.
All these Ethiopian artists, Ethiopian creators, Ethiopian musicians, writers, we have our own roots. We have mythical stories we don't need to look into. Let me tell you something beautiful. There was this book, Of One Blood, and it's written by Pauline Hopkins. It was written a series book, 1902 and 1903. The book is about an explorer who goes out venturing to find treasures. And guess where he goes? To Ethiopia. And in the early 90s, a book written by an African-American woman was a book about an explorer who explores looking for the world, looking for a heritage. And he comes to Ethiopia looking for those heritages, and he comes across this technologically advanced, beautiful country called Ethiopia. And you know what the best thing about that book is? That person, one of the reasons he left to explore the world is because he didn't like his blackness. Wow. He didn't like his black identity. But as soon as he reached Ethiopia, the person who came looking for treasures went back to his country, finding himself, his roots, loving his black identity. This is how you incorporate Afrofuturistic stories in Ethiopia, by ensuring keeping the stories that we have, by making sure, because new form of arts pop up everywhere, you know, but when the trend ends, it ends. If it's not your original idea and conception. Original idea is an art form on its own. Yeah. For instance, in the old days, in the 90s, the music that used to be produced were by Elias Malka, right? Back then, because it was new, it was outstanding, it was out of the common sounds of Ethiopians, they didn't really like it. And there were so many criticisms. But right now, he is one of the pioneers of creating new sounds in Ethiopia. You see? Because what do all these people have in common? They all have their roots. They all make sure that whatever they do, it starts from there. Do you remember the arguments about Wakanda being Ethiopia because it's not colonized and all of that? But Wakanda is sort of like a reimagination. Lupita Nyong'o, one of the actors, the Kenyan actors, she said, like, I'm going to paraphrase it. It's imagining what the continent would have been. It was left to do, what it wants to do, what hadn't been colonized, and you know, everything that happened. So as Ethiopians, we have all these beautiful things. We can build from that. Afrofuturism, one creator said, it's not about wrapping a lightsaber with a kitenge. You know what I mean? It's not just that. I loved that. It's that. You can't really wave around 3D animated versions of things, but it's deep-rooted in ourselves. It's from the way we wear, the way we are, the way we present ourselves, you know?
Because you represent your country, and then the continent.
Basically, Afrofuturism is ensuring, or even asking the question of, what would an Afrocentric future looks like? In every Hollywood movie, I think recently it's changing, but in most of the Hollywood movies, the black people, they usually die at first, or they're not in the future. You don't see black faces, someone that looks like you on TV in a futuristic reality of that specific world.
Wakanda changed that.
Yes and no, to some extent.
Tell me the part you say no.
Yes, it's a technologically advanced.
The reason why I said that is just because the whole cast, for the most part, they had to put in one non-African guy in it, but for the most part, the cast was black. And for us to see that, not only here in Africa, but even there for themselves, for the African Americans themselves, it was a big deal to see a whole cast of Africans.
Yes, but
That was the beginning.
no. Well, the reason there was only one non-African person is because it's a Marvel universe.
Yeah,
and
they had to
connect it.
They had to
connect the story. But you're right. It's an African story. Obviously, you will have all African cast. One of the biggest reasons that Wakanda changed the world, the cinema industry, I believe, is because black people went and saw the movie. They went and saw the movie.
Because it was an all-black cast.
Yes, and it wasn't just it was an all-black cast. It has a lot to do with the origin story. I'm not going to nerd out on the comic books in the Marvel world. But yes, having all-black cast, obviously doing an African story, while you can't really have an African cast unless, you do a Cleopatra story, and then
we've seen them when they were playing black parts in the back in the days. They would put something on their face themselves and come out as black actors. As black actors,
yes, I completely understand. My issue is we shouldn't just all be limited by having all cast, having all black cast in a certain movie, but it's also about the messaging in the movie. Let me I give you a couple of examples. In all of that technologically advanced country, at the end of the movie, T'Challa, the king of Wakanda, while there are so many other African neighboring countries that he was supposed to help out, reach out, support, what he did was he went to Brooklyn and built or bought a community center. That is not an Afrofuturistic future or a Pan-African, an African integrated story. Look, it's just...
I completely agree.
Look, it's just...
But like you said, who made the movie?
Exactly. But one thing I truly believe is, look, there are few representations in Hollywood and few European contexts. But Africans, we're basically human beings evolved from Africa.
Right.
We're Africans. We're the population of the world. But we don't see representations in Bollywood. We don't see representations in other cinematic worlds. And that's a market that we can push. You know what I mean? But then at the same time, how many Ethiopians have you seen starring in Nollywood? Because Nollywood is now it's on the ranks
largest.
Of
I just found out.
Yes, the second largest next to
Largest,
Bollywood.
yes.
In producing movies, because they pump out a lot. But even in Nollywood movies, if you've seen, they do stories about their mythical worlds, their ancestors. We have so many stories like that. We can talk about Lalo, we have so many songs about Lalo ye, all of that, Lalo. That is a mythical story. That is in itself a beautiful story to be explored. We should be able to tell our own stories without the limitations of, criticism and creating a collaboration with other African creators. Let's talk about something that everyone knows about. Like the Indian film industry and other forms of creative works are first and foremost were being produced for Indians. The large acceptance of these creative works within the country, the respect they show to the content they produce, and their strong connection to their roots made them become a household name globally. Everyone in the world knows about the Indian film industry at the moment. Like, people look at their clothing and they know that it's an Indian clothing. That's only because those materials were first being produced to Indians and then they were promoted globally. Even as Ethiopians, we sing along with their songs to, even for us, we sing along to their songs whenever we hear the songs that we like. And that shows you that once you produce something for your audience, respecting your own content and really going deep into your roots, the roots as Ethiopians, if we do that, we will easily be able to be influential in the international stage.
I recently actually did an interview with a Nigerian producer and director, writer. The first thing he said was, Ethiopia is a virgin country that has not touched.
Yes.
And he said, me coming from the, from her brother country, he said, I'm here to make African stories. The same thing you said is what is actually not allowing him to do the stories that he wants here. Information, and also not being able to go and film in certain
I really want, like, the African Union Agenda 2063, I think which aspiration is about Afrofuturism, Pan-Africanism, ensuring all of this through arts, and if they truly believe to succeed in Agenda 2063 aspiration 5, I truly believe for African leaders, in order for them to succeed in Agenda 2063 aspiration 5, they need to allow African people to move within Africa. Right. I'm not going to name a country, but there is an embassy in Ethiopia that makes it very difficult for Ethiopians to travel to that country. But they're the major players, one of the major players in Africa. They're developed countries. We could draw inspirations from them. We could see we could have so many cultural exchanges, so many media exchanges from them. But they make it so difficult for journalists to travel. Even if you can get a visa on arrival, you have to pay $100, $50. Why is that for your Nigerian friend to travel, within the continent to do a story? For me, to travel, to be able to do stories, tell stories about Africa, the leaders need to step up because it's their decision. True. It's their policies. It's impossible for an Ethiopian to travel to any of the European countries. You cannot make it impossible for me as Ghana, as a Ghanaian leader, as a South African leader, as a Nigerian leader. You cannot make it impossible for me to travel to these countries and tell my story as an African. That needs to change.
Yeah, it does, because that's ultimately what I want to do too. I want to go to Ghana and have the story come to Ethiopia and the rest of the continent for that matter.
That's a very important thing to do, because as Ethiopians, we need to change.
Start stepping out.
We need
of our little bubble.
Yes, and address ourselves as Africans.
As Africans, thank you.
I was talking to my friend yesterday, and he told me, he said, growing up, there was this TV program, Africa Journal, that used to be on ETV. So every day, 30 minutes of different African countries, and it was in Amharic. It was translated locally, and it was in Amharic. And he said we were able to at least understand and gain some sort of knowledge and understanding about these African countries. Right now, there is none.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's sad. So many things were there before we became adults.
Yeah.
And then when we became adults and took this route in our future, trying to get information or trying to give information became hard.
Yeah.
So somehow me and you have the responsibility to actually show or teach our people and other African countries about other African countries, about each other. We just have to know. And the way we need to do it, it doesn't have to be about politics. It doesn't have to be about, it could just literally be about art and culture, period.
I mean, collaborate in everything we do. But I truly believe, again, as Ethiopians, we still need to get out of the bubble of, like, I'm Ethiopian, she's African. What does that mean? We need to get out of that and accept and admit that we're Africans. And then when we accept that, our African sisters and brothers will also accept us. One of the things I had to argue with people was when I used to cover the region, they used to say, "You are not part of Africa. You're your own country. You're not." And I had to, like, I remember the hours and hours long conversations I used to have to convince other my fellow Africans that, no, we are Africans.
Part of you. Yeah.
And it's really saddening. Like a few months ago or last year, on one of the major TV stations in Ethiopia, someone was calling a Nigerian a monkey, and people were laughing, and that content is on YouTube, and it just became a big thing because he said, "Oh, I am Ethiopian, you're Nigerian, get off my face, monkey." That shouldn't be a content we distribute to our local viewers.
No.
We need to bring more uniting. We need to bring more beautifully told stories about other African countries.
Absolutely. When you have the balls to call somebody that name, we have to learn. It's not by going out of Ethiopia, because technically, if we look at Ethiopia, Ethiopia is Africa.
Yeah.
We have all kinds of people within our own country.
Yeah.
And we obviously don't know them, because going outside of Ethiopia and looking at other people and calling them names, it's basically calling yourself a name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's nothing to it. There's nothing else that needs to be said on that one. Okay, let's go back to our music. So you've mentioned to me that you like rock music.
Oh, yes.
And when you actually said that to me, I was like, huh? But then you described, I'm not saying I don't like rock. There are certain kinds of rock that I do listen to, and I'm going to invite, our last song is going to be that. But I want you to just elaborate how you got into it. How does rock make you feel? Because rock in itself, when other people hear rock, it's like
metal.
This just disturbing music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
rock music is one of the music genres that has lots and lots of subgenres under it. It's not just metal.
No.
And I got into rock music because it was a music about the world. The lyrics are about what's going on in the society. It is a rebellious song. It's about expressing yourself. It's about being out there, forcing authorities to listen to what you have to say, but through the form of art. And let me tell you a little bit of history of rock music. Okay. A lot of people think, you're not the only person when I say I like rock music. I actually consider myself as a rockaholic. A lot of people are shocked because I talk about Africa a lot, Pan-Africanism, Afrofuturism, and all of that. But the funny thing is, Black people are the founders, the creators of rock music. The godmother of rock music is Rosetta Tharpe. Before Elvis Presley and the man that is famously known in Ethiopia, Johnny Cash, and all the other famous rock bands that you hear today, or even in the 50s and 80s, the first people who started rock music are Black people. People like Bo Diddley, people like Chuck Berry. The AC/DC, the band, they have this very famous leg, the guitar. That is Chuck Berry's move.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley used to copy Rosetta Tharpe.
Ah, really?
The way she was picking the guitar. It was very unique.
Yeah.
And
her voice is also very unique.
Her voice was very unique. She is basically, she started this whole thing. Even while we have that history just put on the sidelines, basically used music as a form of protest. As a form of protesting Black oppression.
Exactly.
The first rock music was released in the 1930s by a Black band. The person who coined in the 1950s, his name is Alan Freed. He's an American DJ. He basically changed the name because, back then, because of segregation, oppression, and because of racism, anything Black people do
was not accepted.
Was not accepted. It used to be considered as filthy. But they just copied everything, and then when the white people were producing it, it became a classy music.
Exactly.
All the dance moves, the twists, the turns and twists, all of that, where they were all started by black people. And the beautiful thing is, all these black artists, when they were doing that, they never forgot their roots.
No.
The drums, the African drum beats.
Cowbells.
Yes, and all of those, they never, they never left that. They used to perform. There is a music genre called shock rock, and they used to perform amazing live performances on stage. And then you come to Africa in the 1970s. The Nigerian psychedelic rock music scene was amazing. Zambians have their own version of rock music called Zam rock. And then you go to different African other countries. You go to Kenya, you have bands like Parking Lot Grass. And then you go to Uganda, you have Valley of Abolition. You have different bands because rock music is deeply rooted in our African culture, in our African identity, in our African music form. It's not just metal sounds that you hear where people are shouting, or it's not just the painting the face. Yes, it's a form of art expression. That's what art is. You express your form of art. But it's not just that.
There's more to it.
There is more
A
to
whole
it.
lot more
And
to
as
it, yeah.
Africans, when I first heard a band called the Funkies, it's a punk rock, Afro-punk rock band that was very active in the 70s in Eastern Nigeria. And it was one of the songs was like Dancing Time. It was so beautiful. All the songs they sing, all these African bands that we have, including Jano band in Ethiopia, all the songs that they sing it in their own local language, expressing their own life experiences, their lived experiences in their own way. And I love that. And the beautiful thing is, rock music is, you can fuse it
With so many different...
in so many different ways. So these African bands, they use African sound with their own rhythm and different modern instruments that originate from Africa, and they produce these beautiful songs. And so, yes, I believe people like Fela Kuti, the Funkies, and the Zamrock, and other bands all over Africa in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 50s, they were Afrofuturistic. They were the Pan-African.
Yes,
they were Afrofuturistic. Yeah. And they paved that way to people like Janelle Monáe, to writers like Octavia Butler. And there is this jazz music composer. His name is Sun Ra. He had this album called Space is the Place. And it was amazingly produced. The music videos, you see these black people in space, in exploring space, like in any art form, the kind of representation that you don't see are represented by these people years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
That is the kind of story that we need to slowly scoop in and produce.
We've gone all over.
Yes.
We've tried to touch everything as possible within this hour. Now, my last question is going to be, and this is something that's come up before, but I feel like in the last 3 years, I think we have acquired this journalism form. And it is investigative journalism. And maybe we should also understand what is investigative journalism. Because my question to you was, do we have an investigative journalist within
Ethiopia?
Within Ethiopia.
Oh, yes, we do.
So how do they do what they do? Because investigative journalism is a little bit harder, especially when you can't get information.
Yeah, when you can't get information, yeah. It takes a long time to do an investigative reporting. There are brilliant, amazing investigative journalists in Ethiopia. Whenever they do their stories, they reach out to people, and it takes a long time to do a story. And so they wait until they collect their data, and then they release the story. Investigative reporting, usually, from what we have seen internationally, and from what we're, as you know, as a journalist student, or as when you take a training about investigative journalism, the one thing they tell you is like, you have to be confrontational, you have to get this information from there, you have to get this from the, you need to ensure you get that. Yes, getting all the facts is important, but how you get that data is also important. And so our Ethiopian journalists always find a way, very in a smart way, to acquire the data and do the stories. One thing I really like about Ethiopian investigative reporting is, unlike international reports, they do cover stories. They do also cover the impact that a certain topic has on people. Usually investigative reporting is data-driven, and a lot of people lose interest because it's all about numbers and paperwork and people that are responsible for something. But the investigative reporting is connected with the human interest. The story, that is a different thing, and that's what Ethiopian journalists are capable of doing.
Right.
And it's possible to do stories like that. Yes, as any other African country, we have so many issues that need to be investigated, that need to be reported. But again, if that opportunity is given to local journalists, we will have local perspectives. You know, we bring the balance into all of that, and we're able to tell the stories. And so, finally, we get the Emmy for it.
Right, because that's basically what you did.
That's exactly what we did.
What you did.
Yeah.
And you were able to do Falling from the Sky because you were capable.
we brought both the human interest story and also the investigative part. And that is, human interest story is literally as Nubia, the Nubia Media and Communications. That's what we're doing. We're currently working on a couple of documentaries. That's also taking a very long time. So hopefully we'll get access. We'll be able to go to these locations and produce these documentaries that we want to tell.
Now that you brought up Nubia, because I had wanted to ask you about how you started Nubia. What is Nubia? And maybe we should close with that. Just tell us about, you know, why you thought there was a need to even start Nubia, and who your collaborators are.
Growing up, we used to have this this 4x4 things written on it, and it says, don't lie, don't steal, don't gossip, and then it says read, and then in bracket it says love your country and your continent. That was what my father wrote on our wall growing up. And so even if we didn't have, you know, we didn't have the childhood of a middle-class family, in fact we were far from it, we had so many problems and issues, but our families wanted us to have those values. And so we, as much as possible, we try to understand about Ethiopia and the continent as a whole. And so I have always had this Africanness deeply rooted in me. Even when I was younger, I remember I used to say, I am African, and, you know, no, you're Ethiopian. But that
you had that conversation.
Yeah, we've talked about that, yeah. And so I wanted to start a company that is able to produce Pan-African contents collaborated from with other African creators. And that's literally our mission statement. It's a Pan-Africanist company to bring African cultures, African voices, African traditions. It's through entertainment, business, politics, entrepreneurship, all of that. That's what we want to do. And that was something I wanted to do because I didn't think it was available at the time, and I don't think it still is in Ethiopia, but I hope there will be more. I hope within Ethiopia As Nubia, we're always ready to collaborate, and we have managed to do that with different organizations, which is great. But we really do want to do that with Ethiopian content creators, and so that's basically what I wanted. And Gusu Salamon, who is an Emmy Award-winning director of photographer, is my partner in Nubia. So the two of us started it a few years ago. And we've done lots of productions, and most of them have human interest stories. Most of them cover people's livelihoods outside of Addis, and we show this beautiful treasure that is Ethiopia.
Brilliant. I'm glad to hear that. And I think one of the things that should come in the future as a communications company that you have is, because we talked about meeting other African journalists, I think there should be a workshop or something between Ethiopian journalists. It could be Kenya, it could be Tanzania, it could be Uganda, it could be from close, in East Africa, because I think knowing our neighbors first and then going...
Yeah. We've had so many workshops.
You have?
I mean, when we started out Nubia, we were working with this international media development agency, and we've done, for one whole year, there were seminars, there were workshops, there were media trainings about business in media, about how media outlets can sustain themselves able to continue without funding. We've done gender in media, we've done access to information, investigative reporting. We've done all of that, but at the end of the year, what we did was we organized the first, you can say, Pan-African journalism conference, especially after the new administration took office 2018. That was the first one. I don't believe there is still one that is independently organized. And so we brought different journalists from different African countries, journalists from all over the country, from different platforms, including community radio stations. Brilliant. We published a publication from writers from African countries, writers from Europe, writers from Ethiopia. And then we published that. And we distribute that to different media organizations so that they will be able to see. But one thing I'd like to say is, what we need as African journalists, I think we've had enough workshops and trainings. What we need to do is to actually have an experience exchange programs between media outlets in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Ghana, all over the country. Have journalists from Kenya come to Ethiopia, see our media outlets, stations, help get them to visit ETV or FANA. And the same thing with, let's say, South Africa. Collaborate between African journalists, African media outlets, media houses as well, not just from journalists, from international journalists or not.
That's a very good point. I thank you very much. I would like to give you the opportunity, if you feel like you haven't addressed or said something that I think I should have said this.
Wangari Maathai, may her soul rest in peace, said, "You cannot enslave a mind that values itself, that understands itself."
Well said.
She said that. And as Ethiopians, as Africans, we need to go back to our roots. We need to understand our histories and take this continent, take this country forward, because we have the potential. And everyone out there who's watching this, who's listening to this, who follows you, who loves you, as Nubia and as Hadra, we are always ready to collaborate, to work with, and anyone who has that state of mind is welcome.
Beautifully said. Thank you very much, Hadra.
Thank you.
And congratulations again on your Emmy Award.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for tuning in, for watching AfreeQa on Arts TV. This show airs on Saturdays from 4 to 5. Tune in. Thank you very much, Hadra.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Gazi.
Thank you.